If you have trouble with proportions when you draw, this is a great exercise. Whether you do it in 10 minutes or not, it actually took me just over 15 minutes to draw. The first 10 minutes are at real time. This is my drawing speed, so you can almost hear me thinking, working out what to do. And then after 10 minutes, I've sped this up to double time. But you can use the cog icon to take it back to half speed, which will bring it back to normal speed. So when I'm drawing something freehand in ink such as this, so there's no erasing, every mark will be at the end. So I want to try and be as accurate as I can with the marks I make on the paper. I'm having to observe carefully, and I'm choosing this front portico as a fairly geometric shape that I think I'll have the best chance of getting the proportions for, getting them accurate. Once I've got these accurate, I can use these to reference the other elements, the windows and the divisions between the floors and so forth. But at this point, I'm firstly aiming on getting the one column, the first column, as correct as I can for proportions, height to width. And now the column next to it, I'm working to get as accurately as possible. So this pair now I see as a unit. And you'll notice that to help me position now the third column, which is not equally spaced, there are two flanking pairs of columns. I try to rough out the proportions of the doorway that we can see, the glassed doorway, as a means of helping me position the third column accurately. Doric columns can be tricky because they're not straight up and down. They do flare out towards the base, and it can be hard to get that looking consistent across all of the columns, especially if you're drawing first thing in the morning, as I am at this point. Perhaps I should have had a double shot of coffee. So, third column done, and now the fourth column. You'll notice I've put tape around the outside edge of my drawing area. If you struggle with proportion and you're drawing actual size of the photo reference, which I would recommend you do if you're working on proportion, because that's the easiest way to get proportion accurate. By placing the border around, besides just neatening the edge, it gives me an extra reference point, because when I look at the elements on my photo, I can not just look at where they are in relation to what I've drawn, but also in relation to how close they are to the edge, and that can help me with spacing. Now, I find it's good not to rely totally on that, because I want to be able to draw accurately in proportion when I don't have a border around, when I'm changing the scale and making it larger or smaller. But at the start, it's a very helpful way of just giving a bit of an aid, a bit like training wheels. However, when we have a scene where there's lots of hatching, particularly around the edges, it's a good way of a neat edge if that's what we want for our drawing. So having got these four columns across done, for better or worse, that's how they are. I'm now using them to get the side edges of the entablature and this overhanging cornice, and then the entablature comes up again on top. This is the sort of neoclassical detail that it's easy not to see clearly enough. And in not seeing it clearly, we can often draw something that's an approximation. But I find that if the photo is interesting enough for me to want to draw it, then I really want to work at capturing the detail that I see. Now, I've defined this central section of the windows above the entablature, and I've done that by referencing firstly in my reference how it lines up with the columns, and then I've done that in my drawing. But you'll notice I put two dots where I think those lines are going to be, just in case my column spacing isn't quite accurate enough. I also want to make sure that it looks right. So that gives me the chance to visualize where they'll be, but to make adjustments before I actually put the lines in. Now I put the hatching for the door, for the glass door, and I'm going to do the hatching for the shadows under the porch. I intend to keep this a relatively simple line drawing, and I'm not going to do much detail with anything else. But the porch is such an important part of this. I thought I want to give it a sense of 3 dimensions and also make this the focal point. I mean, it's going to be the focal point because it's the area of most detail and it's smack dab in the middle. But if I put the most contrast there as well between light and dark, then it's also going to grab the eye, draw attention, and make it the focal point. So I can spend a little more time working on this. You'll notice that for the sign, for the Treasury sign, I didn't try to write Treasury. I tried to just create some lights and dark values that would suggest writing, that would suggest that this was a sign. It can be a mistake to try and write words on signage that's simply too small to be able to write accurately. We're better off doing, in effect, drawing the effect of the writing, not trying to draw the actual detail of the writing, the accuracy of the writing. It's yet another example of drawing the effect of detail, not the actual detail. Often the more detail we try to draw, ironically, the less accurate it looks. If you're finding this interesting, please hit the like button for me right now. And I'd love to hear a comment as to how you found these real-time drawing videos. It's been a while since I've done one, so if you're using them and you'd like to see some more, please let me know in the comment. So now I'm going upwards in this central panel and doing this window. And I'm looking at the proportions particularly of how much blank wall is left on each side of the window. So that helps me to work out the width of the building, the width of the window, because I want to leave the width of the wall space on each side looking proportionately the same. You'll notice what I often do is my original horizontal lines often are not exactly horizontal. With the camera basically wedged against my forehead when I draw, it can be a bit tricky to just be angled with the paper in my sweet spot so that I can actually draw those lines comfortably. But you'll notice that I always correct the line because I'm better off having a correct line that's a little bit darker and then a fainter line underneath that's not quite angled correctly than leaving the not quite angled correctly as the only thing to look at. If we correct our lines that aren't quite right, even if they're almost right, suddenly the incorrect line is not nearly as noticeable because our brain can anticipate the correct line, the horizontal line, because it knows that's what should be there, and therefore it sees that line more strongly. Now, I haven't done the heraldic device at the top there. I've left that for later. I feel like with the time slipping by, I just want to define a bit more of the overall space. So doing these steps, if you look carefully at my marks, at my lines for the steps, you'll see I haven't actually been super, well, I was going to say careful. I've been as careful as I can be, but I haven't been trying to draw each step as a long, thin, horizontal rectangle, which is extraordinarily hard to do. Again, I've tried to capture the effect of these steps. When we look at them, I want it to be obvious that these are 3 thin steps. And again, drawing less often creates a more realistic look. So now I'm establishing the widths of the different segments of the building as it moves up. And I'm a bit careless because I clearly should have worked out the ground floor windows first. I'm not sure why I started on that middle right-hand window, but you can see I wasn't aligning it properly with the window underneath. So fortunately, I hadn't got much of that window drawn. Again, as soon as I see that I've done something carelessly or inaccurately, I stop and I work out what to do. Now, my first take on that window was that it wasn't quite wide enough. So you can see that I've established it a little bit wider on the paper by add in the frame into the outside rather than the inside of my original rectangle. And these are the ways we can massage our proportions for details such as this. When I've drawn the window or whatever the object is, I look at it again, and if it's not quite right, if it's slightly too thin or slightly too wide, I massage the vertical or horizontal lines slightly. I push them out or bring them in a little bit so that the overall visual, kind of the obvious shape that we see, looks more in proportion. Even if something a little bit less obvious is less in proportion. Drawing freehand is a real juggling act to end up with the look that we want as best as we can present it with the marks we've already drawn. So now there are these smaller windows up top, and I intend to keep my line work very light here. We have switched to double time. I'm using a 0.2 millimeter pen if you're interested. And if you've got to this point and you've resisted the urge to hit the like button, please surrender and hit it now for me. As I said, I'd love to hear whether you find these 10-minute drawing real-time videos helpful. This is the sort of exercise that can be great for a daily drawing exercise of 15 to 20 minutes. If I'd had a bit more time, or if I'd been spending a bit more time, I would have done some hatching for the windows. They do look a bit empty there. However, I think you can see that adding the hatching in the portico has worked nicely to help really make that stand out more as the focus, and therefore the simplified facade behind that porch, that portico area, I think doesn't look quite so bad. And now I'm doing the railings on each side. I feel like these are important to help anchor the building, anchor it to the sides. And you'll notice the foreshortening is really important, but the foreshortening is quite different on each side. On the left-hand railing, we're looking far more along the railing so that the angle's more tighter, so the foreshortening is more extreme. On the right-hand railing, we're looking more front on than we are in the other one, and therefore we see more of the decoration. Now, I don't try and draw the actual railing decoration too much, but I want it to look like a real wrought iron railing. But I can't draw it in too much detail or it will stand out too much for its relative position in the scene. So having done that, it's time to pull the tape off. Hope I don't tear the paper this time by being impatient. And it's pretty much done. Why don't you have a go drawing it? You'll find this photo reference, of course, on my channel community page if you want to use it yourself. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope you found this interesting, hope you found it helpful, and I hope you have a go drawing it. I'd love to hear a comment on how you're finding this series. But whatever you draw, however you draw it, in whatever time you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.